I think the mood's very strange now. I think everybody is fed up. I mean, I'm tired of this situation, but we have to just keep strong because almost certainly now the vaccines will come on stream sometime in the first part of the year. We just got to hang in there. Compared with what my parents' generation went through in the Second World War, where people were off in the army and the navy and the air force for years at a time and didn't see family, and they didn't know whether they were coming home at all. I mean, one of my uncles was in Stalag Luft 4 or 5. He was a pilot and shot down in North Africa as prisoner of war camp. Didn't know whether he was coming home. This was the sort of thing that generation put up with. And we're just asking people to just hang in there. We're in a very strange place. It's quite difficult to get your head around it now because the lockdowns have had some effect. In one sense, we are back to where we were at the beginning of the summer, where we need to secure the dividend from the lockdown and tie that down. But the chaos around the messaging about Christmas and the falling out of the members of parliament and the business community and so on is now putting a lot of very odd factors into play, quite random changes in the rules. I don't know whether they're going to allow sandwiches to count as meals in pubs, but it's all getting very odd. People are asking whether the rules make any sense. For me, it's going over my head. I was only a B student at school, so, maybe I'm not clever enough to understand the rules, but then there are a lot of people like me in this country, and I think it may be quite difficult for people to comprehend. It all comes back to the testing fiasco from the very beginning, because if we had got that right, if we'd invested in developing high levels of testing capacity, locally available, frequently available, then we wouldn't be in this mess. We might have, had something that was much more like the tier 1, tier 2 situation across the country, backed up by the extensive use of the tests like they've been piloting in Liverpool with dramatic effect. I mean, it's come down from over 700 per 100,000 to just over 100 per 100,000 in Liverpool in the last 3 weeks. I've also been talking to my colleagues in Bahrain, and they had most remarkable achievements now by implementing the same kind of thing as Liverpool's been doing, but for the whole country, making tests freely available for schools, for events. That's why the Formula One Grand Prix took place yesterday, because they'd been able to test everybody. When I was there in February, one of the first decisions we made together was to suspend Formula One. Things are pretty well back to normal. I mean, they're down to 1 or 2 deaths a week in Bahrain. The country of Bahrain is about the same size as the city region of Liverpool. It's about 1.5 million. The other thing that's of interest in from Bahrain was that they had a kind of relapse, if you will, during August, which was a big religious festival that they have, when everybody all gathers around the homes. It sounds a bit like Christmas. The numbers of new cases went right up then, up to 700 or 800 a day. It's down to about 100 now a day in Bahrain. But that religious festival, the bosom of the family, and the important role that the women have meant that a lot of women got infected in the religious festival. So let's hope that we don't have a big surge in cases among older women when we get into January. The big question now is whether this 5 days of Christmas will lead to a surge after a week or two following it when we get into January. And I think my colleagues who I've talked to about this are all thinking, it's going to get very busy come mid-January. It's a bit like, when I was in general practice, you found that you had a lull before Christmas when people were out getting ready for Christmas, doing their shopping and so on. So they never came to see the GP. And then it went mad in January because they all had to come for the repeat prescriptions that they hadn't collected in December. It just gets chaotic in January in general practice normally. But the same may happen here, that people may be feeling a bit under the weather, maybe going down with COVID, not go and get the test, have the family round, infect each other, and then it incubates and cooks up, and then it breaks through in the second and third week in January, and you see a surge coming at that time. So if you want predictions, I would say that's the sort of thing that might happen. I would much prefer that people were taking charge of this themselves and using the common sense. And this is one of my main criticisms of the government, because the government never really set out to engage with the public from the outset and played ducks and drakes with the data, misled us about the numbers of deaths, all the palaver about how many tests were going to be achieved by the end of April, and then it turned out this was capacity, it wasn't delivery. The breakdown in trust means that you can't really take people on a journey with you when you're asking them to do things. We've seen it around the country with some of the local directors of public health and the local political leaders. I think you see it with Joe Anderson in Liverpool, and you see it with some of the other political leaders, how people will listen to them, but they won't listen to the government because the government have messed it up. As adult members of the community, we owe it to each other to be sensible. Labour has to support the right thing, and the right thing is to be very measured about what we do. So I imagine that the Labour Party will support the government. The government's in a really tricky position because, again, it's lost the trust of the economic wing of the Conservative Party, and of course it's some of his own Brexiteer people now. So it's really looking a bit odd, but it looks as though in the end we might be moving towards more of a centre ground coalition of political voices, even 4 years ahead of next general election. It may be that the sensible middle ground will start speaking to each other and putting forward ideas together, whichever party. The issue with the vaccines is several-fold, you see. There's such pressure to get the vaccines out on the street and be delivered that it's really important that we don't make shortcuts. And we saw this strange story last week with the Oxford vaccine and this odd tale about they'd only given half the dose to some of the volunteers. You began to worry that they were trying to rush this thing and that the data wasn't that secure. That could be a disaster. If the vaccines are allowed out and onto the street too soon, there's a small minority, 5 or 10% of the population, who are anti-vaccine. There's still 80% plus are supportive of vaccine. But we can't afford for vaccine programs to be undermined by having a failure or having something go wrong with side effects. We just can't afford that, because the benefits of vaccination over the last 50 or 60 years for all those childhood things, measles, mumps, rubella, whooping cough, all those diseases that used to kill children or cause brain damage or cause long-term physical harm, that's been one of the magic boons of the post-war period. And yet we have this anti-scientific, superstitious minority that have gained traction in recent years, particularly since social media has come along, and they can't be given oxygen. We have to stick with the science. You know, my grandparents wouldn't have been able to believe what we've had during my lifetime. And we can't allow that to be undermined by rushing jumping the gun with COVID vaccine. So it seems pretty clear that they will come through, but it's important that we just keep steady as you go with the public health measures, with the social distancing, with the hygiene, with the mask wearing, until it's time to have the vaccine program. There are serious ethical issues around the vaccine program. You know, one of the ones that's of most concern is that the rich countries seem to have got the options tied up for the supply for a lot of it. And this is horrendous when it comes to solidarity with the third world, with people in poor countries, particularly living in the big cities with their slum areas and where the virus can really take root. The World Health Organization and the international agencies really must mediate and try and make sure that we have a fair approach to this. Is terribly important. On the question of profit taking, I think one of the vaccines, the Oxford one, is going to be sold at cost, I think. And that's highly desirable if that's the case. But I think one of the things that lies behind the stories about when the vaccines are coming on stream is the impact this has on the stock market. And you see the stock market goes crazy when there's one of these announcements. And I imagine that these people who are manipulating the stock market, pushing the price up, taking the profits and selling and then buying in again when the price comes down, must be having a great time. But this is the national and global lottery that's called the International Stock Exchange, which is a real indictment on the human family, that's how we allow things to be done, which is supposed to be for the benefit of mankind. I'm optimistic in life generally, and I've been keeping my powder dry on this one. I mean, we haven't had two waves. It's like going up a mountain. We had that first climb, and then there was another one because we hadn't got rid of the first one. That's what happened. But the thing is that it's very likely that there'll be a third something in January for all the reasons we've discussed about this lapse we're going to have over Christmas. But I'm optimistic that by the time we get through to April, May, with the vaccine coming through and so on, we'll be looking forward to something like a normal summer. But the world will have changed, and we don't know all the ways it's changed. We'll be thinking differently, as we've already begun to, about how we work, how much we work from home, travel, how we spend our lives, really. I mean, this has been a 1-year meditation for people about the meaning of life and what their priorities are. And I don't think we're going back to how we were before. There'll be fallout of this, of a political kind that we can't anticipate at the present time because of the positions that people have taken. And of course, it's all bound up with Brexit as well, and how that, combined with the COVID pandemic, impacts on the economy of our economy and economic relations. So it's going to be an interesting year, 2021, but interesting perhaps in a more acceptable way than 2020. Thanks for listening. Double Down News. The only priority is the truth. Support Double Down, Patreon, Double Down News, the future of digital broadcasting.